Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine, and we are very excited to be hosting veteran New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd, who's here to talk about her new book, Notorious, Portraits of Stars from Hollywood, Culture, Fashion, and Tech. Actually, Maureen is doing a double header here at P&P today. She'll be discussing her book now, and then at 5 p.m., she'll be moderating a new book by New York Times alum Elaine Scialino. Now, I can't recall anyone at P&P previously doing back-to-back events like this, but that's Maureen. She's an exceptional multitasker. And speaking of multitasking, Maureen's book is a testament to her own versatility as a journalist. She's, of course, had an accomplished career as a columnist, which she's been since 1995, and a Pulitzer-winning one at that. And also, she's been a feature writer. She says at the start of her book that after spending a while writing columns limited to about 800 words each, she wanted to write longer. And so, in addition to her columns, she's been able over the years to do more extensive features for the Times and other publications. These have tended to be profiles of people not involved in Washington and politics, but in Hollywood and Silicon Valley. And they've been not only worth reading, but rereading. And so Maureen has now helpfully collected more than 30 of them in this new volume. I've always been fascinated, she says in the introduction, by how powerful people wield power, how charismatic people create charisma, how talented people nurture or squander their talent. And one thing evident from her book is her knack for drawing those she profiles off their standard practiced scripts to reveal much more about who they really are. That's true whether her subject was a leading Hollywood woman like Jane Fonda or Candice Bergen, a leading man like Paul Newman, Robert Redford, or Al Pacino, a funny person like Tina Fey or Larry David, a fashion savant like Tom Ford or Diane von Furstenberg, or a tech mogul like Elon Musk or Peter Thiel, just to name a few of those featured in Notorious. The end of her pieces, Maureen often includes an entertaining bonus section dubbed Confirm or Deny, in which she launches into a rapid-fire Q&A to establish whether something once alleged about the person being interviewed is actually true or not. There's much to enjoy in these and other parts of the book, and much to talk about with Maureen this afternoon. And guiding the conversation will be Simon Godwin, a friend of hers and artistic director at the Shakespeare Theater Company here in DC, where he's been since 2019. Previously, he was based in London and served as associate director of the National Theater, the Royal Court Theater, and the Bristol Old Vic. So please join me in welcoming Maureen and Simon.
Well, hello. Oh, we're going to, right, yes, good. It's a kind of sound check in action. So I wonder whether we might just, yes, good, find the perfect level for the microphones. Hello, my name is Simon, and welcome, Maureen.
Thank you, Simon.
How's your Saturday going, Maureen, so far?
So far, so good.
Okay, good.
So wait, I have to tell you about Simon. So Simon was a famous child actor in England, in London, and going to fancy restaurants with all his money at what, 15?
14, I think.
14. And he is the director of the Shakespeare Theater Company here. And for those of you who are not going to be going to Trump Kennedy Center, you want to come see Simon because he is super talented. And I highly recommend. He did this amazing Romeo and Juliet during COVID. It's a movie. And also he did the incredible Macbeth with Ray Fiennes. He directed. And I think that kind of revolutionized theater in Washington.
Wow. Thank you, Maureen. That's very generous.
But also one more thing. A couple years ago, I got my graduate degree in English literature at Columbia. And it was much harder than I thought it was going to be. And it was mostly focused on Shakespeare. So I would call Simon and also Drew, his dramaturge at the Shakespeare Theater, my friend, and Michael Kahn, the former director, and James Shapiro, who's a famous Shakespeare expert at Columbia. And I was talking to the husband of a friend of mine who's a shrink, and I said, you know, I have crushes on 4 Shakespeare experts. What is that? Does that have a name, that syndrome? And without missing a beat, the shrink said, love's labor's lost. So I'm very grateful to Simon, and he's brilliant. So you should all go see some of his shows.
Well, Maureen, thank you. I don't quite know how to respond to that, but that's extremely kind of you. And needless to say, Maureen has been an amazing advocate for the theatre and a great friend to me since I arrived from London in September 2019. So thank you so much for inviting me, Maureen, to grill you. I mean, it's an unusual role reversal because, of course, you are normally the interviewer and now you're the interviewee. So I'm going to get started. And we're going to have about 20 or 30 minutes of chatting, Maureen and I, about her amazing book. And then Maureen and I would love to have questions from all of you, and I think we're going to go up to the microphone one by one and share your questions, and Maureen will do her best to try and answer them. So let me start with Notorious, which is the book behind us both. This morning I was actually looking up the word notorious, which comes from the Latin notus, noted, people who have a cause to be known. And then gradually throughout the 16th century, its meaning shifted to those noted for some bad practice, unfavorably known. So I guess my first question for you, Maureen, is this book a collection of heroes or villains or both?
Well, the word doesn't apply to everyone in the book. In fact, when I started out doing these longer pieces, well, I started out at the beginning of my career, but when I started doing them at the Times, you know, I tend to end up, I've gone through so many impeachments and what else have we had? You know, impeachments and congressional investigations and horrible things that the column ends up being very serious and critical. So I was looking for people who had traits I admired, either their talent or their leadership. So there are only a couple situations where the people kind of blow up the interview. But the word notorious is really, I love those one-word Alfred Hitchcock titles, but it came from an Al Pacino quote in the book where I asked him how his life changed after he made The Godfather. And he said he became notorious and his life became chaos because there were so many sycophants and so many women who suddenly found him attractive when he got famous. And he became kind of a semi-alcoholic or an alcoholic. He wasn't quite sure how he wanted to describe it. And tranquilizers. And he just descended into this kind of hell of notoriety. He's very shy, very vulnerable person. Ellen Barkin said when they were making Sea of Love, he really couldn't do love scenes unless he was in love with the person. So she had to kind of throw him around the room, and he just could barely do it. Very not like his rough, urban, you know, American Buffalo persona. But anyway, so I like the idea of that because I first got obsessed with people with magnetism when I was 13, and my older brother took me to Washington. We had in the park also Shakespeare in the summer, and he took me to see Hamlet. And I got fascinated with Hamlet's magnetism, and I decided he was my boyfriend, my first boyfriend, not knowing that he is the worst boyfriend in literary history, which explains a lot if you think about it. But I was fascinated with, he had power, but he wasn't using it correctly. He was kind of making mistakes. And often Shakespeare deals with the moment when people become their own worst enemy. They can go one of two ways. Either they can, proceed gracefully and, like Luke Skywalker, they learn how to use the Force, or they proceed in a very self-destructive way. And I've always been amazed when I covered all these presidents that the minute they're elected, when they should be basking in the glow of feeling great, adulation, acclamation, that's the moment when often their gremlins come out, their insecurities, their imposter syndrome. So that's what fascinated me, and that's what I'm trying to ascertain in the book. And oftentimes these portraits are at the moment when actors or tech gods, lords of the cloud, or singers, or journalists, or musicians are at the top of their power. And how do they use that power? For good, for evil? Do they destroy themselves? And that's what I'm interested in.
Excellent. And so, Maureen, if we just sort of start at the beginning of how these profiles come into being, is it that you think, wow, goodness me, I've just seen Denzel Washington on stage, or I've read a book by this amazing author, or I've seen this TV show, and then you reach out to the celebrity? Or is it some case the celebrity reaches out to you to say, hey, I'm doing this, would you like to interview me? How does that kind of, the setup occur?
Yeah, well, I always thought that Hollywood was a kind of twin pole with Washington, because they're both obsessed with illusion and, in the case of Trump, makeup and winning and losing. And then Silicon Valley came into it. So in Hollywood, you have box office. In Washington, you have approval ratings. In Silicon Valley, you have clicks. And also they are, creating illusion. So all three cities fascinated me because they're all about the same thing in different ways. So when I started these pieces, some of the people, it took me, like Iger, it took me 20 years to talk him into sitting down for an interview. Other people 5 years, other people 2 years, because my column can be tough and they were afraid. So it was super hard to explain that this is a much warmer, less judgmental forum, because most of these people are not in charge of life and death decisions. So I'm not examining them the same way.
And so you managed to persuade them to come for the session, the interview, and it can sometimes take, we learned today, 20 years to get them in the room. What strikes me reading the book is that how varied the attitudes of those people are to you. Denzel Washington, for example, feels very guarded, very contained. What are your strategies, Maureen, to sort of disarm the all-powerful during your conversation?
Denzel Washington was, he's not in the book, but he'll be in volume 2, but he was, Simon and I talk about him because I interviewed him for the Joel Cohen Macbeth that he did with Frances McDormand. And now he's on Broadway. If you have an extra $1,000, you can see him in Othello. And I really admire him as an actor. And I was so excited to get the interview. But he is very guarded, very tough interview because he challenges the premise of whatever you're asking. So if you ask something, he'll challenge the premise of it. And, you know, he was looking at me like that Denzel razor blade in his eyes look in Training Day. And that's a very frightening circumstance to interview someone in. And then I got to the confirm and deny, and I was trying to explain what it is. And I said, it's fun, it's dada, it's silly. And he's giving me the Training Day look. And he goes, if it's silly, why are you doing it? But somehow I got him on the topic of his favorite ice cream, butter pecan, and his whole face lit up. So
it's finding the way in.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the interview was better than I thought in retrospect because his mother had just died, and he wanted to talk about, his father was a preacher, I think, and he wanted to talk about spirituality. And you never know whether to let someone talk about what they want to talk about or to get them on a topic you think is more interesting. But we did talk a lot about spirituality. And then I realized later when he said that's why he wanted to be a director more than an actor, because he wanted to help guide people. And I think he might have even become a minister since then. But when Will Smith famously slapped Chris Rock, he was the first one to, you know, take Will Smith aside and kind of minister to him. And I realized later that that was just what was on his mind and in his heart. So that happens sometimes too.
Wow. And do you ever give them a drink? I mean, is there ever strategies in terms of encouraging them to have a whiskey or a glass of wine to kind of loosen the tongue, as it were, or are those things perilous?
You think I would get someone drunk, Simon, just to get a good story?
Well,
Okay.
Would you?
Yes.
Okay, there we are. Good.
So I did that, like, I just did a big profile of Graydon Carter, who was the very glamorous, most interesting man in the world, editor of Vanity Fair for 25 years. And we started together at Time a long time ago. And I wanted to get the full, most interesting man in the world picture of him. So we started, he's famous for making martinis, and he chills the glasses and shaves the lemon. And so I went to his apartment before we did the interview, and he made one of his famous martinis. And he has a bar in his apartment that he copied from the movie Ford versus Ferrari. I mean, everything. It's one of those apartments where every single thing is perfect, And so in that case, there was a lot of drinking. But then the next day he called and he's like, can I do the confirm and deny over? Because I was drunk.
One thing that strikes me also, I think in the introduction, you talk about the four kingdoms of politics, Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and fashion. And you suggested actually you've probably had the most fun with the fashionistas. Yeah. What stands them apart as a kind of breed, as it were, as a kind of set of types?
I love fashion, but I myself don't know that much about it. When I read about it, it's like reading a foreign language, but I think it's very fun and glamorous to read about. So I was good friends with Andre Leontali, who was an amazing operatic character. His profile is in the book, and I just loved hanging out with him, even though he would always tell me my dress was wrinkled and I should go home and iron it. Or one time we went to the opera, and I had on this vintage dress I was very proud of. And he looked me up and down and he goes, Tulle, Blanche Dubois. And then that was it. It was wrong. But Tom Ford you feel like he's very intimidating because he has these ads with naked supermodels, and he just seems like he'd be someone intimidating to meet. And then when you meet him, he's this really sweet Texan. But he is, if you've seen the movie The Red Shoes about obsession, he is obsessed with aesthetic sensibility. And he's so finely, his taste is so great and so finely tuned that he really can't enjoy anything because he's always looking around, kind of seeing what's slightly off. And when I arrived at the interview at this very fashionable Hollywood hotel called San Vicente Bungalows, Tom Ford was in the room rearranging the furniture. He was pulling a potted plant from one side of the room to the other, and he had sent out for the kind of white flowers he likes. And I just can't even imagine what it would be like to be like that. But I also, when you interview fashion people, I'm never sure, should you wear something that they designed, or is that sucking up, or I never know. But Tom Ford, I had been trying to get that interview for 10 years, and I was so excited. So I went and splurged on this red chiffon Tom Ford dress with this beautiful big velvet belt, and I did the interview in the rearranged room, and then I was flying back to the East Coast the next day, and I picked up the New York Post and I went to page 6, and there was a picture of Priyanka Chopra in the red dress. And I realized I had had the belt on backwards. So I had all the hardware in the front and the laces in the back. That's how little a fashionista I am. And so when I got to Washington, I called Tom Ford and I said, Mr. Ford, I just wondered, did you notice that I had on the belt of your dress backwards? And there was this long, really pained pause. And he goes, yes, I did. So also another fun fashionista who's in the book is Dion von Furstenberg, who is so fun and so earthy. And she called her family and she goes, I'm moving to Venice. So then when I did the interview with her, I had to go to Venice. I had to. And she has this unbelievable palazzo on the water. But she's so much fun to talk to because she's very earthy and uninhibited. And she was telling me that she one weekend had flings with Warren Beatty and Ryan O'Neal on the same weekend. And then she once had a chance to have a threesome with David Bowie and Mick Jagger. But she walked into the bedroom and looked at them, and she said they looked like such little skinny things. She changed her mind, and she told them she couldn't do it, you know? So she's a very interesting woman.
We're all contemplating our own weekends there, Maureen, wondering kind of, the difference perhaps that we're spending our Saturdays.
I know, much more interesting than my weekends, except today.
But just going back to the details again, I'm just curious. So, how long do the interviews take, Maureen? How long traditionally do the celebrities give you with them?
Well, there's one old one about Paul Newman at his height, and it was for the New York Times magazine cover. So I got to spend off and on about a week with him, and we traveled with his racing crew, and I saw a production he was putting on in Connecticut where he lived. The minimum is an hour and a half, I would say. I can't really do. They're supposed to be like little impressionist oil paintings. So the more time I can get, the better. And recently I interviewed George Clooney, and usually movie stars will bargain you down to an hour when you want an hour and a half. So after an hour, I begin getting my stuff together, and George Clooney is still talking. So another hour goes by and I begin getting my stuff together, still talking, day turns to night, still talking. So we ended up spending 5 hours together. He never talked to a publicist. He never talked to an assistant. He never looked at a phone. He just talked in an incredibly charming, interesting way about politics and Hollywood and his aunt, Rosemary Clooney, for 5 hours. And it was great, but that never happens, and I'm sure it will never happen again.
I guess what strikes me reading them is your affection for many of the people that you're interviewing. But there are some exceptions. I can't help but think of Kevin Costner, which you're less enamored of. how challenging is it? I mean, it seems like it's rare that you end up sort of burying Caesar rather than praising him. But do you feel like that's very much your right? That as soon as the celebrity has agreed to do the interview, then it's over to you to kind of decide how they're going to come across, or do they try and control that, or do they call you afterwards and try and retract statements? And yes, what's the kind of
Yeah, the
ethics of
two
that?
in the book that were very prickly were, and they're old interviews. They're both for the Times, but when I first started at the Times, and one is Kevin Costner, and oftentimes I pick someone because I think, as I said, they have this certain magnetism, and he was the head Hollywood hunk at that moment when I interviewed him. And he was in New Orleans filming JFK, which was very controversial. And we walked out down this street to the hotel where we were going to do the interview, and we were stopped at a red light, and there were these two very sweet older women, and they very sweetly asked Kevin Costner if they could take a quick picture at the red light, and he was tapping his cowboy boot, and then he began yelling at them and saying, it was like watching someone kick kittens. And he said, "Can't you see I'm doing an interview? How dare you interrupt me?" and all this stuff. And we weren't doing the interview. He was standing at a red light. And then we started the interview, and he was very prickly. He didn't understand why I was getting my own interview instead of a group interview. He didn't know what the Times was. He didn't understand anything. He was in a bad mood because for the first time, he was getting criticized for his "now you see it, now you don't" English accent in Robin Hood. And JFK was very controversial, and he didn't like being criticized. So he was just surly.
You did take him on about the English accent. I mean, you were quite robust with him in the interview.
Well, at the end of the interview, then he put his hands in the back of my neck and squeezed, and he said, "Don't worry, everyone has a bad day." And I was like, "I'm not having the bad day. You're having the bad day." But he said, "Are you going to play this tape for your girlfriends?" And I said, "Well, I interviewed Paul Newman, and I managed not to play that tape for my girlfriends, so I think you're safe." But then he kind of stalked away in his cowboy boots. I mean, I still love watching him, so Yellowstone fans, don't get mad at me. But it's what I'm describing. What at a certain moment do you become your own worst enemy? How are you handling this incredible, potent drug called fame? And Eddie Murphy was also kind of surly.
And I mean, talking of men who become their own shadows and use their power for monstrous aims, the book strikingly begins with "This is why Uma Thurman is angry," the account of Harvey Weinstein's dealings with Uma. And how much do you feel your pieces are political, Maureen? And how much do you choose to start the book with that interview? And I wonder as you recall the interview, how that feels and that situation feels today in terms of gender and celebrity and power.
Well, this was a very traumatic interview to do, and I wanted to start the book with it because it was such a hard interview, and I still actually cannot even go in the hotel room in New York where I was working on this because it was so hard and horrible to write. But Uma Thurman did have Harvey. This was after we broke Me Too, and Uma Thurman did have the usual Harvey experience where he lured her into a bathroom and he was wearing the white bathrobe, came out, and he did all that. But there was a second part to her story that was even more traumatizing to her, which was when she and Quintino, who were one of the most famous auteur actress combinations in Hollywood history after Hitchcock and Ingrid Bergman, they were making Kill Bill, and she had helped with the script and helped with the idea of The Bloody Bride, and she was very close to Tarantino as an artist. And he wanted her to do this stunt where it's a famous scene in Kill Bill where she's looking into the rearview mirror and talking, and her hair is blowing while she's driving a turquoise Carmen Ghia. But she was not a good driver, and she didn't want to do the stunt. And Quentin Tarantino talked her into it and sort of tricked her into it. He gave all the other stunt people the day off so she couldn't get one of them involved. And then he changed the route. So there was this sharp curve, and he gave her the manual Carmen Ghia instead of the stick shift she thought she could deal better with. And she crashed, and she could have been crippled, and she still has neck and back pain. But she felt betrayed by someone she had trusted. And he, after, he didn't talk to me, but after the story came out, he told Deadline, it took 3 days, but then he told Deadline, a trade paper, that Uma was right. He had, made a mistake in how he handled that, and he shouldn't have made her drive the car, and he just completely copped to it all. And they're still friends. I mean, her daughter was in his movie about Hollywood, but she had been working for 15 years to get the crash footage out of him, and he would never give it to her because he knew it would be damning. And he finally gave it to her, and we ran it. And the Times lawyer was very reluctant, and I just put my hands on my editor's shoulders, and I just said, press the button. And Uma, I think she needed that to get past it and sort of have it out there. This is what they did to me. And Harvey was involved in that too. But
Do you think Hollywood is a different place now?
no, I think it's going back to where it was before Me Too. There's a guy named, I think his name is Jeff Shell, who's taking over Paramount, who got fired from NBC for sexual harassment. And Brett Ratner, who had been exiled for sexual misconduct, was chosen by Melania to do the Melania documentary. And Amazon paid him, I think it's $40 million. And he's back, And so a lot of female executives have been replaced with male executives in recent months. And no, we're kind of back where we were in many ways, not so much on the surface, but in other ways, yes.
Goodness. Well, look, I can't help but think as we're sitting here that we're in politics and prose, so we should probably talk a little bit about some of the political figures that you've engaged with, Maureen, as if, in a way, it's all politics. But Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, I think you interviewed them in the book in 2017. How much did you sense then of the future, and how much has there been some surprise plot twists since then?
Well, I have an essay on Peter Thiel, and it's very interesting because in the essay, he predicts, in the Peter Thiel essay, he doesn't like Trump, and he has a lot of problems with Trump. But in the Peter Thiel essay, the two men founded PayPal together, and he says Elon and Trump will get together because they're both grandmaster chess salesmen, and they're larger than life figures. And eventually they're going to find each other and get together. But Peter Thiel told two very interesting stories about Elon at PayPal. He said there was a weekly poker game, and Elon joined the poker game, and he bet everything on every hand. And afterwards, Peter Thiel was like, why were you doing that? And Elon goes, well, I don't know how to play poker. And I feel like if you look at Doge in Washington, you see that story. And the other story was Peter had bought a McLaren sports car, and it was so new, he didn't even have insurance. And they jumped in, and Elon said, I want to drive this thing. And they didn't have their seatbelts on, and Elon drove so fast that the car started, flying in midair. did a 360-degree turn and they crashed. And somehow they were both alive, which Peter Thiel said was a miracle. And again, that's exactly how he conducted himself in Washington. So when you hear about early Elon, it isn't that he's gotten darker. He's in many ways the same guy. But in my Elon piece in the book, in 2017, I had seen that Elon said if we didn't get a kill switch for AI, we would be summoning the demon. And a lot of the other lords of the cloud were like, you're hysterical, you're crazy, forget it. There are going to be billions for us. And so I went out to interview all of the tech guys and see whether AI was going to turn us into the family pets, which is what I think. It's interesting because in that piece, Elon was trying to save us from the existential threat of AI. And now in Washington, Elon is the existential threat. So it's a very interesting arc. And that's why he wanted to go to Mars, because he wanted to have some place to take humanity if AI turned on us. But he always said he wanted to die on Mars, just not on impact. But then another of the guy in charge of Google's AI explained to Elon that AI could follow him to Mars, which hadn't occurred to him. So that's another trait that comes across of Elon's. He's a genius in some ways, obviously, but also very naive. Like the fact that he didn't realize that people would turn on Tesla, you know, if he got this involved in cutting Social Security. I mean, what was he thinking?
And Maureen, the dramatist, I mean, you've described that the marriage that was long going to happen between Trump and Musk. I mean, is there going to be a divorce? I mean, do you sense that they're so combustible that what brings them together will drive them apart?
Well, many predicted that, and because they said Trump can't have another supernova right next to him in the Oval Office. But Jaron Lanier, who's this fantastic musician, and he invented virtual reality. He was one of the founders of Silicon Valley, thought that they wouldn't have a blow up because they both knew exactly what was in it for them. And Elon was upset. He has a trans child, and he said, my son died, and now we've got this woman. And, you know, so he hated woke politics, and Trump hates woke politics. And Jaron thought they would stay together. But then this week, it seemed that Trump had had a little bit enough, and Elon stepping back a little. But I talked to this former Apprentice producer, and he had predicted it just a week ago, right before this happened. He goes, Trump's had it with him. And I said, how can you tell? And he said, I can tell from his body language. When he like hunches over and looks down like that, when someone else is talking, that means he's had it. So, I mean, it's a fascinating story. I always love to look at history through the relationship of two men. And these two men are like gutting history, you know?
Beyond history. Well, look, before we go to the audience, which we're going to do in a minute, I mean, there's so many extraordinary characters that you've engaged with, Maureen. If I was putting you on the spot and you were planning your dream Notorious dinner party, which three of them would be round your table?
Well, I love Tom Ford. Tom Ford has so many crazy, interesting qualities. He has a black garden in London, all black. He has all these rules where men can never wear shorts unless they're playing tennis. And I think he kind of thinks of himself as a sexy vampire. So he really doesn't believe in going out during the daylight because you're not going to look your best, you know, and there's this wonderful restaurant in LA where he goes it's in a hotel called Sunset Tower. And he loved this one table. He used to love to go eat there. But then he realized there was a light that put a light on a slight bald spot. So the hotel owner, Jeff Klein, who loves Tom Ford as well, put a light switch next to the table so that when Tom Ford came in, he could turn off the light. And I am like not, I guess that's what a triple Virgo does. I mean, I am completely chaotic and disorganized. So I love obsessive people because I'm so fascinated with their obsessions. So Tom Ford, definitely. And, you know, I loved meeting some of these women that I profiled in the book. I loved meeting Jane Fonda and Candice Bergen and Patti Smith. And I would have to include Patti Smith because she is one of the coolest people I've ever met. And it's not even her music, but you know, I went to Paris to 2 of her concerts and we were walking down the street, and you know how the French are just, nothing impresses them. They all stopped eating, left the bistro, came out on the street to yell, "Patti, Patti," and she was gliding down the street with these gray pigtails like some ancient queen. But she was just really cool. She gave the waitress at our lunch tickets to the concert. And, you know, movie stars have these crazy riders on their contract where they demand blue M&Ms and stuff. And hers is for brown bread and peanut butter. She's just like a very cool, very moral, literary person. I highly recommend her Substack. She gives concerts. She takes you on tours of, how do you say it, Simon Rambo, not Rambo, like the French poet Rambo.
Rambo?
Yeah.
Rambo, yes, French.
His grave, and she's really cool. So I would have her. And
So you got Patti Smith, Tom Ford, and one more.
one more. Who would I have? Not Kevin Costner. To think of someone else. Well, Candice Bergen is very lovely, very classy. And she has one of the most interesting stories in Hollywood history. Her father was Edgar Bergen, who was a famous ventriloquist who had the top TV show in the 50s with a wooden dummy called Charlie McCarthy. Her father raised the dummy as her preferred older brother. I mean, all of us, my mother loved one of my older brothers the best. We've all gone through that. But this was a wooden dummy. And when the father died, he left the dummy all the money in his will. And Candice Bergen had to come to terms with this, and she came to terms with it enough that she keeps some of the memorabilia in her apartment. But she was also at Truman Capote's black and white ball. She has a white mink bunny mask from the ball in her apartment. And she was also almost killed by Charles Manson because she dated Doris Day's son, Terry Melcher, and that was the house he was looking for because Terry Melcher had gone out and recorded music with him. And then even after that, Manson family members found them in the new house they had moved to get away and stole a telescope and kind of made sure they knew they were watching. And she's just one of these zealot-like people who has been at she was the first woman to host Saturday Night Live, and she was terrified. She's just a really cool, classy person.
Well, that's quite a dinner party, Maureen. Thank you. Okay, good. Let's hope we're there too. Okay, wonderful. Look, I think it's time for some questions from the audience. So if anyone would like to ask one, just a reminder, we've got this microphone here so everyone can hear you. Would anyone like to be brave enough to ask our first question of Maureen this afternoon? Yes. If you have one? No? Yeah. Somebody over here? Yeah. Yes. Oh, you have one, madam. Yes. Do you want to go up to the microphone and ask it?
No, I think I'm loud enough.
Do you want to use mine?
No.
No. Well, we just got the unaccompanied, unamplified voice from the front here. I can always repeat the question.
Okay, fine. I was curious how you decide when to be a guest on a podcast. I'm thinking in particular of your recent appearance on Club Random with Bill Maher, who is, I love him. He's a handful. He's like a problem child. And I'm just curious, when you go into an interview, like what makes you decide, I'm going on that, I'm going to spend an hour with him?
Hear that okay?
Yeah, she's asking how I decide to go on podcasts, and I went on Bill Maher's Club Random podcast, which was terrifying because the whole premise of the podcast is that he gets very stoned. He's smoking a joint and drinking tequila, and some of his guests, have a hard time keeping up. And they asked me what I wanted. You can have any substance you want. I just chose champagne because I figured I would just sip a little and try and stay on my toes. But I've gotten to know him over the years. When ABC fired him back in the first Bush administration, I defended him, and we just got to be friends over the years. And so I knew he wouldn't. I told him on the podcast I was scared, and he goes, "You're scared? Well, you could destroy me, And so then I calmed down because it would be mutually assured destruction for both of us. But he's a really fun guy, and he had dinner with Trump this week, and on his next show, he's going to describe what that was like. So, yeah, that's going to be very interesting. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Great. Thank you. Great question. Any other? Oh, yes, that's right. The audience are a bit nervous with the microphone over there, but thank you for a good reminder. Yes, sir, at the back.
I'm always fascinated by larger-than-life figures in their respective fields. When did you?
I'll say it again. I'll repeat the question for the gentleman. Yeah.
When did you know or feel like I'm really good at this? I really have an influence. This is what I want to do.
Great. This is a question about kind of when Maureen discovered her vocation for kind of unpacking the powerful.
Moment, an article that you wrote that got such great feedback that inspired you. Like, this is what I want to do.
An article that got such feedback that it helped Maureen realize her kind of quest.
No, I think I'm going to have to blame Shakespeare for this. Sorry, Simon. But when I was 13, and then I started, studying Shakespeare in school, and then I went back for this other degree, I just got addicted to larger than life figures. I love opera for the same reason. I love primary, very primal, the Crayola box with all the brightest emotions that Shakespeare does. He covers everything like envy, jealousy, every primal emotion you can have, he covers. And that's what I like. Like, I hope I don't offend anyone, but I don't want to read a Franzen novel about siblings squabbling. I get that at home, and then they fight, and then one of them gets a headache, and they go to the CVS and they buy aspirin. I don't care. I want Macbeth, killing his nice boss. I mean, I want to try and figure out, why do people do that? Why did they become their own worst enemy? And you see that all the time with presidents. So when I first started in covering politics in the mid-'80s, I was using Shakespeare as a template, like thinking of it like a Shakespearean court and what goes on. And so I was focused on the president as a person, which most of the male reporters then were not doing. They were doing the horse race, the numbers, the policies. And they thought what I was doing was very female in a way and emotional. A lot of people criticized me for taking that stance, but I really didn't even understand the criticism, because look at American history. Whenever we've had some incredibly scarring national event like Watergate or Vietnam or Iraq, it's always because the president has some weird gremlins and does something where he should know better, and we're all kind of trying to tell him, and he can't hear. So every single horrible national scandal we've had has involved the president's personality. It isn't a policy. George W. Bush's policy during the campaign was no nation building, modest foreign policy. And then they get in there and they have this hyper aggressive preemptive war policy, which was the exact opposite of what he campaigned on. I mean, oftentimes, Trump is doing the exact opposite of what he campaigned on. He did always have these positions on tariffs, but he was supposed to be bringing prices down, and the only prices he's brought down are the stock market prices.
So in a way, Maureen, your kind of genius lies in the private public, which is a very Shakespearean antithesis.
Well, I think people would be shocked and upset if they realized how much these family questions with presidents determine our future, our kids' future. When Bill turned over, a quarter of the government with health care to Hillary, that had to do with their personal relationship. He felt he owed her. And when she wouldn't listen to him about how to get it passed, when he was ignored on that, it was because she was mad at him about stuff. So our health care is being decided by their relationship. And that, Iraq was about George Bush Sr. and George W. Bush and their relationship and his desire to kind of outdo his father. So all of these things which shape American history for decades to come often have to do with what's going on behind the scenes with the president and his family. And, Biden staying on so long, that had to do with Jill. So we don't, a lot of people don't pay attention to that, but it happens every time I've covered a White House.
My friend and fellow Brit and fellow writer David, hello, hi, you have a question.
Just picking up from your previous answer, I wonder, in the early days interviewing Donald Trump, were there any clues as to his political aspirations, and did you ever imagine he'd be president one day? And secondly, I wonder what's going on right now. Does he remind you of any particular Shakespearean character or play?
Yes, thank you. Good.
Yeah, I started covering Donald Trump in, I think it was 1987, whenever the year when Gorbachev came to Washington and New York. And Trump was one of the businessmen in New York who was invited to meet with Gorbachev. So I called him before the meeting, and I said, how do you see this meeting going? He goes, we've got to be very careful about the Soviet Union. They're very tricky, and we don't want to get too close to them, and all this stuff. So then I called him after the meeting, and he goes, I love them. They want me to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. I love them. We trust them. We love them. So very early on, I saw his ability to change on a dime, if he was flattered. And that's a through line. But I went on his first presidential exploration trip in '99. He was dating Melania then, and they had brought in a wardrobe consultant. She was wearing a new Calvin Klein wardrobe with, skirts longer. She still had the stilettos, and she was very funny about it. She's like, they've dressed me like a political wife. And we went to Miami. He made a speech, and there were some two Cuban Americans, and there were some signs, Trump for president in 2000, and he literally sort of cringed back. He was kind of shy about that idea then. Because basically, when I interviewed him, he loved to do lightning rounds, as you might have noticed from his presidency. That was his favorite thing. He'd call me and he'd say, come over and do a lightning round. But
what is a lightning round, Maureen? I'm so sorry for my ignorance.
Well, in a way, it's like confirm and deny. It's just a bunch of rapid fire questions about politics and culture. But in those days, he was obsessing on why the stars of Twilight had broken up and who was in the right. And he would tweet about that all the time. And, he was so sort of light, what's the right word, superficial compared to how we thought of presidential candidates, that it just didn't occur to me that he would be able to get up to speed. But in that first Republican debate he did, where he was very nervous, he realized that he could use that Don Rickles insult style to succeed and somehow make up for everything he didn't know. But also, I think it was his timing, because he came along at the same time that Twitter and other social media sites were twerking up their algorithms to stress conflict and insults. And then he just was doing that naturally. And so I think the combination of, it's interesting because he's 78, he's about to turn 79, and yet he probably wouldn't have been president without Twitter. They have a young woman who, a very attractive young woman who follows him around with a printer and prints out positive stories about him. He still wants his stuff printed out, and then he has a gold Sharpie, and he'll, use paper. And yet he is the one who has aligned with all the tech guys who realized they didn't have to stay in their digital world. They could come out of their digital world and buy our government.
Terrifying. And Maureen, if he was a Shakespearean character, who would Donald Trump be?
Oh, right. I forgot that part. Well, I guess he has a little of Lear, a little of Caliban, but the part I noticed the most is Richard III, because Richard III comes up to the edge of the stage and wraps the audience into the bad thing he's about to do. He tells them, and he uses humor so that, he's supposed to be the villain, but the humor kind of counters it, so you don't think of him as badly. And Trump does the same thing. He tells his fans, all day long, he's on TV saying what he's going to do. And he has that Liberace side where he's putting up gold cupids in the Oval Office, and he's put gilt on the mantle and a gold TV remote. And he's, he went down to Kennedy Center and he had this whole speech about why he loved cats, which was also George W. Bush's favorite play. And he said, the first time I saw cats, I saw all these beautiful male bodies in shimmering gold tights. And then I saw the female bodies in shimmering gold tights. And it was this amazing thing. And, he just has this kind of wacky side. So then when he does the very authoritarian stuff, you get deflected by the crazy side he has. And, I think the SNL mimic, it captures this, where he's sort of being funny. So then when he turns authoritarian, you're thinking, wait, is he really doing what I think he's doing? And I feel like Richard III kind of has that same thing.
Wow. Well, thank you, David, and thank you.
But really, he's more like P.T. Barnum than Shakespeare. As Michael Kahn said, he's not complex enough to be Shakespeare.
He's not complex enough to be Shakespearean, as Michael Kahn, my predecessor. Oh, my goodness, we've got a late round of questions. We have. I think in that case, what we're going to do is we're going to ask our two last. If you could both speak into the microphone, we'll have one and then two, and then Maureen, you're going to try and engage with the sort of the last two. There's three even. Okay, well let's go through these quick. Starting with you, madam.
Hi, Janet.
If you're all up for this,
Very
we're going to
talented
take three in a
Janet
bundle,
Fries.
and then Maureen's going to sum up by trying to address all three in one go. So the first one is.
I wanted to go back to the idea of looking at family and background and of the individual. And you talked about Biden and the Bushes and Trump, but what about Obama? Do you think that there were things going on with family or his personality?
Good. Okay. Thank you. That's the question about Biden, about families, family context leading to character development. And Obama, excuse me, Obama, the family dynamic that kind of constituted Obama. next. We're going to get a bundle. We're going to get a bundle. Yeah.
One of
Yes.
Maureen's, quick flashes. Hi, Maureen.
Hi, Sandra.
It's good to see you.
It's good to see you.
I want to ask about Roy Cohn because I grew up in New York City, and we all knew about Roy Cohn, and we all knew how terrible he was and how repulsive he was, and we knew that Donald Trump and Roy Cohn were like this. My theory is that we now have Roy Cohn in spades in the White House. Will this change? Will this evil malevolence be with us?
I've got a question about Roy Cohn and his.
Don't ask. Let them ask another question. I'll forget.
No, we
Let
can
me
cope. We can
answer.
cope with a third. We can cope with a third. So yes, we're going to get to
I'm
Roy
Roy
in,
Cohn.
in our last bundle. And our last question to ponder is yes, madam.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I would like to know what your opinion, both of you, what your opinion is on Prince Harry and leaving the royal family.
My goodness. Okay. Wow. So 3 super diverse questions, and then also throw in Prince Harry leaving the royal family. There we are. Good. So there, Maureen. I mean,
Didn't I
this is a
ask-
lightning round for you.
Didn't I ask you that when we did the panel on your book about Prince Harry? Did I ask you?
My book.
I mean, about the Shakespeare Theatre.
Oh
Company.
God. Okay. Right. Well, Lebs, give me a moment to think about Prince
I
Harry.
feel
When you
like
talk about.
I'm glad you asked that because I tried to ask him this and he didn't give a good answer.
Okay, well, thank you.
So
Well,
you
thank
can-
you, thank you, thank you for the encouragement, Maureen. I appreciate that. So let's talk a little bit about the family dynamic.
Sarah.
Well, I'm going to get to Prince Harry as the third question. So let's go back to the first one for a moment and just talk about Obama and the family dynamic of Obama.
All right, Janet. So Obama talked about, I think he gave a speech this week and talked about how it was hard with Michelle because basically she had to sacrifice a lot. They had the same educational background, and the same credentials, but as with many marriages, she had to sacrifice a lot more in raising the kids. And he talked about those stresses. And clearly, I was hoping that this fantastic young family with young kids would enjoy the White House. But, I think she really did not like politics. So I think they're much happier now in the Netflix lobby. That's more what they like. But I don't think that their dynamic as a family affected policy in the way it did with the Bushes and the Clintons. Those were dramatically,
And indeed,
policies were dramatically affected, but not the Obamas. I mean, I went to Cuba with them and I was just proud to travel with them as the first family because they were so elegant to travel with.
and the contrast now of the second question of Roy Cohn, which I think in a way the sort of inference was we've sort of got Iago in the White House in a sense. Or the
Well,
spirit of Iago in the White House. I mean, is that-
Roy Cohn, you see tapes of him in this new George Clooney play, which I went to the other night, and because he was Joe McCarthy's aide. And I do think, one time Trump said he was frustrated with his lawyers, and he's like, where's my Roy Cohn? I do think Trump patterned himself on larger-than-life figures in New York, George Steinbrenner and Roy Cohn, and he would go to Yankee Stadium and see other larger-than-life figures around New York, and that was the life he wanted. He wanted a big life in New York City, not Queens. And I think Roy Cohn taught him that any publicity is good publicity, and the main thing, deny, deny, deny. And I think he shaped Trump. And so I agree with you. Yeah.
And then finally, the question of Prince Harry. He's left the royal family. And what's driving him, do you think?
Oh, sorry, Sandra. You were the one that I agreed with. You were Prince Harry. Sorry. I thought you were going to
Oh, God,
answer.
I'm
You're
very-
avoiding it again. You are the Brit.
Yes, I mean, I find myself, I suppose because I now live in America, I find myself feeling very distant from the royal family, to be honest. And it seems like they are a drama that seems strangely provincial compared to the kind of dramas that we've been talking about today, or frankly, that we're living every day, all of us. And I think Maureen's point about the real effects of the decisions that are being made in very complicated ways on people in this city is so profound, and of course in America. So it feels like a distant, almost Shakespearean comedy from long ago, for me, if I'm honest, that particular dilemma.
Yeah, my only thought about this is that I really hate it when your siblings marry people who don't get along, and so that friendship between your siblings is marred or stopped. And that's what I hate watching that, because you want Harry and William to be able to get along after what they went through together when they were young. And I just feel sad because, there was a Wall Street Journal piece that at the end of your life, your siblings are going to be the ones that, are holding your hand in the hospital. So I do feel bad that relationship was hurt. But I don't know how you mend it after his book. That would be tough.
Well, you mentioned Caliban at some point, Maureen, and the phrase that's come to me as we've been talking is that simple phrase of Prospero when he's talking about Caliban, this thing of darkness, I acknowledge mine. And I think you've really, through this book, kind of probed into the dark heart as well as the luminous heart of these characters, and your insistence on trying to get to the bottom of what makes these people who they are is an unrivaled talent. And I'm so grateful for you, for the book, for your brilliant questions in terms of the audience, and your brilliant answers, Maureen. So thank you. Maureen Dowd.
Thank you, Simon.
So